And the next to speak is Balakrishnan Rajagopal, UNSR on housing, on recognition of Domicide as a pathway to accountability and responsibility for the destruction of Gaza. Balakrishnan Rajagopal.
Distinguished members of the jury, my name is Balakrishnan Rajagopal. I'm the current UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing and a professor of law and development at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I'm here in my academic capacity. I will address specifically the mass destruction of homes and displacement in Gaza in particular. As the so-called ceasefire in Gaza remains in tatters, hundreds of thousands of displaced people of Gaza are also returning to search for their homes, and almost in all cases finding only rubble. Northern Gaza in particular is decimated and resembles a moonscape that defies belief. Indeed, domicide, or the mass destruction of housing, residential buildings, homes, property, and civilian infrastructure needed for homes such as electricity and water, is in fact the most visible, recorded, and unique element of the war on Gaza since 2023. When such domicide is systematic and widespread and accompanied by genocidal intent, it constitutes war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, most visibly seen in Gaza. The level of destruction in Gaza is more acute than even the worst examples in terms of scale and ferocity. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Dresden, or Tokyo, all during World War II, or the bombing of Aleppo or Mariupol in recent times. The jury should be aware that more than 90% of all housing has been destroyed in Gaza, and Israel has dropped more than 200,000 tons of bombs on Gaza, which is more than the equivalent of 13 nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima. Almost all civilian infrastructure such as water, electricity, and sanitation, or services including schools, universities, and hospitals have been obliterated or damaged. Under international law, such infrastructure and services form part of the definition of adequate housing. Almost 94% of all hospitals, 95% of school buildings, and almost 89% of all water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure have been destroyed or damaged. The attacks have targeted tents, IDP and refugee camps, and religious and cultural sites. Almost all of the population of Gaza of 2.3 million have been displaced, half of them children, often multiple times from one place to another. More than 2 million people are homeless. More have been rendered homeless in a shorter time in Gaza than in any other conflict in recent memory. Despite this catastrophe in Gaza, massive destruction of housing is not condemned or criminalized on its own terms under international law. Homes are supposed to be qualified protected objects under international humanitarian law, but they can lose that status too easily if there is some link with the military objective, however far-fetched. Norms such as proportionality and necessity in international humanitarian law have not proved capable of preventing mass destruction of housing. Indeed, the normative, moral, and political black hole in which mass destruction of housing exists is one major reason why I propose the term domicide to the UN General Assembly to name it, understand it, condemn it, and prevent it. The jury should take into account that the humanitarian, psychological, and cultural impacts of domicide are profound, as we just heard. A home is not just four walls and a roof, but a repository of memories, hopes, and aspirations. Destruction of a home leads to profound psychological loss and trauma. People mourn when they lose their homes and lives of dead ones, but not necessarily the loss of other items, even those essential for human survival. The mass destruction of housing and the neighborhood leads to the disintegration of community life, an intangible heritage which leads to profound cultural loss. Then there is the humanitarian impact of loss of a secure and safe place against the wind, cold, and heat, especially for infants, small children, older persons, and disabled individuals, as well as the gendered impact of lack of privacy on women. Indeed, destruction of a home destroys the possibility of enjoying so many other rights which depend on it. The ability to cook, access water and sanitation, or attend school. Housing is a gateway right to other rights, including the right to self-determination, because self-determination depends on having control over land. Destruction of homes, which results in the displacement, leads to the inability to enjoy self-determination over the land on which homes stand, which is why housing and land rights can never be separated. Domicide is, when seen through the prisms of housing and land, an attack on a people and their self-determination. The Israeli occupation and annexation of Palestine, along with policies of apartheid, focus so much on control of land and housing for this reason. Ultimately, domicide, whether slow and incremental or rapid and genocidal, is the main tool of converting occupation to annexation. Yet the law and politics of domicide remain non-existent or underdeveloped, hidden in the blind spots of international law. Homes are allegedly protected objects under international humanitarian law, but are regularly bombed without limits. In fact, as the world urbanizes more, war has become more urban, targeting the built environment, as we have seen in Gaza, which was 77% urban before the outbreak of war in October 2023. Israel's use of artificial intelligence through systems such as Lavender, Gospel, and Where is Daddy, the idea of systematic demolition of residential buildings using explosives, robots, and D9 Caterpillar bulldozers, and the overall pattern of mass bombardment of buildings, judging by its scale and ferocity, show that the destruction of residential buildings and civil infrastructure has been intentional, disproportionate, and unnecessary for any plausible military objective. Indeed, the pattern of destruction goes beyond Gaza and can be seen in the West Bank as well, for example, in the use of Caterpillar bulldozers. Despite these facts, there is little promise thus far that anyone would be prosecuted for such war crimes, although many countries do have laws to prosecute violations of war crimes on the basis of universal jurisdiction. Unfortunately, the record is bleak. There have been no convictions of anyone for mass destruction of housing and war crimes trials of the past. The definitions of crimes against humanity and genocide in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court do not include mass destruction of homes. South Africa has alleged before the International Court of Justice in its case against Israel that rendering the territory uninhabitable through massive destruction of homes and related civilian infrastructure actually constitutes genocide under the Genocide Convention. If that argument is upheld by the ICJ, it might offer a glimmer of hope that law is still relevant to control the inhumanity of domicide. I urge this tribunal to respectfully issue a finding that bolsters this line of argument. Under international law, Israel and the other states and private entities that committed or became complicit in domicide in Gaza through their supply of weapons, machinery, products, and expertise remain both accountable and responsible. Accountability is a language of legal and moral liability that usually attaches to individuals or private entities, while responsibility, especially state responsibility, is a well-established doctrine of international law. It is indeed a fundamental rule of established international law that states are responsible for their wrongful acts and must provide reparation to restore all rights. This will be a long struggle, and this tribunal is an important milestone in that quest. Indeed, the tribunal may want to consider how its ruling can influence the strengthening of the politics of solidarity, which must trump the politics of domination and subjugation, which remains operating systems of world order. As law strives to be a language of not just domination and power, but of legitimacy to establish its hegemony, alternative narratives of legitimacy are emerging and are possible, which can shape a law and politics of counter-hegemony. I urge the tribunal to approach its analysis and findings in that spirit. Finally, I urge the tribunal to consider the impact of domicide on immediate survival needs and longer-term rebuilding of Gaza. Despite the current ceasefire, immediate shelter needs of almost 2 million people loom large. This is complicated by two factors. First, winter is coming, and many vulnerable individuals, including infants, may perish as in the past 2 years unless there are enough tents and caravans to house them. However, as long as Israel controls the borders of Gaza, only a trickle of aid can come in, judging from past experience. After the failed ceasefire in early 2025, hardly any tents and caravans were allowed inside Gaza by Israel, although it had agreed to do so. Second, the sheer volume of rubble created by the obliteration of all built infrastructure in Gaza has created an extraordinary challenge of debris removal and disposal. This debris remains contaminated and is mixed with unexploded munitions, thus rendering whole areas unsafe. But large equipment and personnel needed for this task cannot come in unless occupation and border control are removed. Longer-term rebuilding is even more complicated and is estimated to cost billions, the largest portion of which is for restoring and rebuilding adequate housing, according to available estimates. But the real challenge of rebuilding after such catastrophes is the level of trauma and social disarticulation, and not just how rapidly the physical structures can be rebuilt. That will remain an enormous challenge. It is thus manifestly clear that the Commission of Domicide, which has been the main tool of genocide in Gaza and the occupation of Palestine as a whole, must be confronted in all its enormity, as consequences of domicide are in fact among the biggest challenges to the recovery of the Palestinian people. The jury will want to consider this in its deliberations. Thank you.
I would like to ask members of the jury if we have any questions about this topic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rajagopal, for your presentation. Usually, lots of people have made the comparison, the destruction of Gaza with Dresden and Hiroshima. You mentioned that what happened in Gaza was about 13 times the damage in Hiroshima. Hiroshima was just one incident. Dresden was over just 3 days, with about less than 4 tons. And here we're talking about 50 times. I would appreciate it very much if we can be provided with a table that shows Gaza, Dresden, Hiroshima, the amount of destruction, the number of days. It is reported that Hiroshima was about 70% destruction, while Gaza, as you mentioned, over 90 or 95%. The number of victims, I believe they will exceed probably 200,000. We may have just official numbers, those who have been counted with names, but those who have not been counted, probably much more. Even according to Israeli sources, they might exceed 200,000. So that would be much appreciated, just to see it in a table format with the two incidents that most experts would talk about, Dresden and Hiroshima, as being the highlights of World War II, and how that compared to what's happening, and the fact that this is just a matter of an hour or two and a day or two, while this has been taking place over 734 days. Thank you.
Of course, I can of course have that table prepared, and I'll be happy to supply that in the coming days.